You're not supposed to be able to record the past. Sound waves travel, they dissipate, they fade into nothing. That's physics. It's a rule. But in this house, the rules don't apply. I know this because last night, I pointed my shotgun microphone at the empty air in the corner of this bedroom, and I recorded a lullaby that hasn't been sung in over 70 years. And the truly terrifying part? I'm starting to think the house is trying to show me who stopped the singing. My name is Elias, and I'm a sound designer. My job is to create the auditory world of a film. The whisper of wind through a haunted forest, the wet visceral tear of monster's claw through flesh, the subtle creak of a floorboard that tells you you're not alone. I live in a world of manufactured fear. I spend 12 hours a day listening to, editing, and layering sounds that are designed to make your heart pound and your skin crawl. You'd think I'd be immune to it. You'd be wrong. I took this job, this house, for the quiet. The film I was working on was a nightmare. A psychological horror flick called The Silent Child. It was all about atmospheric dread. And my director, a man named Julian with eyes that never seemed to blink, wanted absolute authenticity. "I don't want stock sounds, Elias," he'd said, his voice a low hum over the phone. "I want the real thing. I want the sound of a house breathing, the sound of loneliness. Find a place, an old place, and just listen to it." The studio was happy to foot the bill, so I found it. A 2-story farmhouse built in the late 1940s, nestled deep in the rolling hills of upstate New York, a good 20 miles from the nearest town. It was a relic, abandoned for the better part of a decade. The online listing photos were uninspiring. Peeling paint, windows like vacant eyes, a porch that sagged like a tired old man. But it had one thing I desperately needed: silence. No traffic, no neighbors, no noise pollution. Just the wind and the trees and the house. The real estate agent was a woman in her 60s with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She called the place a fixer-upper with character. "The last family, the Abernathys, they left in a hurry back in the 50s, she'd mentioned, her keys jangling nervously in her hand. "Tragedy. Their little girl, she just vanished." She shrugged, a quick dismissive gesture. "Sad story. But that was a lifetime ago. The bones of the house are good. I didn't care about the story. I cared about the acoustics, and they were perfect. The old wood seemed to drink in sound. The air itself felt thick, heavy. It was a perfect soundstage for my project. I set up my studio in the large downstairs living room. Monitors, synthesizers, mixing boards, and an array of microphones that looked like alien antennae. For the first week, it was bliss. I captured the groan of the house settling at dusk, the mournful whistle of wind through a crack in a window frame, the skittering of a mouse in the walls. I was layering these sounds, twisting them, turning the house's natural voice into something monstrous for the film. I was in control. The first time I heard something that didn't belong, I almost missed it. I was reviewing a recording of room tone from the upstairs master bedroom. Room tone is the sound of silence, the unique ambient hum of a space. I had the gain cranked all the way up, my headphones clamped tight over my ears. I was listening for the faintest electrical buzz, the whisper of air from the vents. And then I heard it, underneath the low hiss of the amplifier, so quiet it was barely there. A woman's voice, crying. It was a soft, exhausted kind of weeping. A sound of pure, undiluted grief. It lasted for maybe 3 seconds, and then it was gone. I rewound the track, played it again. There it was. My blood went cold. I ripped my headphones off, my heart hammering against my ribs. The room was silent. I was completely, utterly alone. My first thought was radio interference. My equipment was sensitive. Maybe I'd picked up a stray signal from a distant station. It was unlikely out here, but possible. I spent the next hour scanning every frequency, every band. Nothing. I tried to dismiss it. My mind was playing tricks on me. I'd been working too hard, immersed in a horror film for weeks. My brain was primed for fear. I packed up my gear for the night, made a simple dinner, and tried to watch a movie on my laptop, something light and stupid. But I couldn't focus. I kept listening to the house. Every creak of the floorboards above me, every rustle in the chimney, it all felt intentional. The next day, I became obsessed. I took my most sensitive microphone, a Neumann shotgun mic that could pick up a pin drop from 50 feet away, and I started methodically recording every single room in the house.
I was hunting.
I didn't know for what, but I was hunting. I spent hours in silence, just me and my gear listening. The kitchen, the dining room, the small study with its dusty, empty bookshelves, nothing. Just the normal, explainable sounds of an old, empty house. I almost gave up. I was standing in the smallest upstairs bedroom, the one that must have been the little girl's. It was late afternoon, and golden light streamed through the grimy window, illuminating a constellation of dust motes dancing in the air. The room was bare, except for faded pink roses on the wallpaper peeling at the corners. There was a faint, sweet smell in the air, like dried flowers. I set up the mic stand in the center of the room, aimed it at the far corner, and hit record. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, and waited. For 10 minutes, there was nothing. Then, through my headphones, I heard it. Laughter. It wasn't loud. It was airy, distant. The sound of a very young child, maybe 5 or 6 years old, giggling. It was a happy sound, a joyful sound, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever heard. It was followed by a woman's voice, warm and gentle. "All right, my little songbird, that's enough. Time for bed." The child giggled again. And then, silence. I didn't move for a full minute. I just sat there on the floor of a dead girl's room, listening to a conversation that had happened 70 years ago. This wasn't radio interference. This wasn't my imagination. This was a recording, an echo. The house. The house had remembered it. The grief-stricken weeping in the master bedroom. The mother and child in this room. The house held on to these sounds, these moments like a recording tape. And my equipment was sensitive enough to play them back. My project was forgotten. The horror film, the deadlines, the unblinking director, none of it mattered anymore. My new project was this house. I needed to know the story of the Abernathys. I needed to know what happened to the little girl they called Songbird. I started my research online, digging through digitized town archives and old newspaper articles. The Abernathys, Arthur, Eleanor, and their 6-year-old daughter, Lily. Arthur was a failed writer who'd moved his family from the city for a simpler life. Eleanor was a former singer. The local paper from October 1953 had the story. Local girl missing? Lily Abernathy had vanished from her bed one night. There was no sign of a struggle, no forced entry. The window was locked from the inside. She was just gone. The police searched for weeks. The whole town turned out, combing the woods, the fields, the river. Nothing. The suspicion, of course, fell on the parents. Arthur, the moody, frustrated writer. Eleanor, the beautiful, sad-eyed mother who became a recluse after Lily disappeared. There were whispers of arguments, of a troubled marriage, but there was no evidence. Nothing to hold them on. After a few months, the search was called off. A year later, Arthur and Eleanor sold the house for a pittance and disappeared themselves, swallowed by their grief and the town's suspicion. The house was their only witness. And it was starting to talk to me. I began to map the sounds. Each room seemed to hold different memories, different emotions. The kitchen held the sounds of everyday life, the clatter of silverware, Eleanor humming a tune as she cooked, the murmur of casual conversation. But even here, there was a growing tension. I captured a snippet of Arthur's voice, sharp and bitter. "It's this place, Eleanor. It's suffocating." The living room, where I had my studio, was the most volatile. This was where the arguments happened. I recorded fragments, echoes of anger and fear. "You can't keep her locked away," Arthur's voice boomed, distorted by the decades. "She needs to be a normal child." And Eleanor's reply, a desperate whisper. "There's nothing normal about her, Arthur. You know that. She's different." "Different how?" What did she mean? Lily, the little songbird. The recordings in her room were always happy. Lullabies, bedtime stories, laughter. There was no hint of what was to come. I felt like I was assembling a puzzle with half the pieces missing. I was listening to the ghost of a family tearing itself apart, but I didn't know why. The phenomena began to escalate. It wasn't just sounds anymore. I'd be working at my mixing board and catch a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, a shadow darting past the doorway. I'd walk into the kitchen and find a cupboard door slightly ajar, a door I knew I had closed. One afternoon, I went upstairs and found a single perfect handprint on the dusty surface of the little girl's windowsill. It was impossibly small, the size of a child's hand. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat. I hadn't been in that room for 2 days. I lived alone. I wasn't scared anymore. Or rather, the fear was being overshadowed by a profound, all-consuming curiosity. And something else, too. A sense of empathy. For Eleanor, trapped in a house she hated. For Arthur, watching his family unravel. And most of all, for Lily. The little girl who vanished into thin air. I decided to try and communicate. I knew it was insane. I was a sound engineer, a man of science and frequencies. But the rules of my world no longer seemed to apply within these 4 walls. I took my microphone back to Lily's room one evening. I set it to record, put on my headphones, and I spoke into the silence. My voice felt small, foolish. "Lily, my name is Elias. I can hear you. I want to help. Can you tell me what happened?" I waited. The only sound was the frantic thumping of my own heart. I felt ridiculous. What was I expecting? A clear voice from beyond the grave? I was about to pack it in when I heard it. It wasn't a voice. It was a sound. A faint rhythmic scratching. I cranked the gain, my fingers trembling on the dial. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was coming from the wall, the one behind where the bed must have been. It sounded like a fingernail, dragging slowly across old wood. I followed the sound, pressing my ear against the floral wallpaper. It was colder here, noticeably colder. The scratching was coming from inside the wall. I knocked on it. Instead of the solid thud of plaster and lathe, the sound was hollow. There was something behind it, a space. My heart was racing. I ran downstairs to my toolbox and grabbed a pry bar and a hammer. Back upstairs, I hesitated for a moment, the tools heavy in my hands. This was crazy. I was about to tear a hole in a house that wasn't mine, based on a ghost scratch I'd recorded. But the feeling that I was close to something, some kind of answer, was overwhelming. I wedged the pry bar into a crack near the baseboard and pulled. The old plaster groaned, then cracked. A cloud of dust billowed out, smelling of decay and time. I worked frantically, tearing away chunks of plaster and splintered wood. And then I saw it. It wasn't a hidden room. It was a crawl space, a narrow, dark void between the walls. It was barely big enough for a child to squeeze into. And inside, on the dusty floor, was a small, leather-bound book. A diary. My hands shook as I carried it into the light. The leather was cracked and stiff with age. The pages were yellowed and brittle. On the first page, in the elegant looping script of a bygone era, were 2 words, Eleanor Abernathy. It was her journal. I had found her voice. I sat on the floor, the diary in my lap, and I began to read. Eleanor's early entries were full of hope. The move to the country, the fresh air, the dream of a peaceful life away from the city's noise. She wrote lovingly of Arthur, of his passion for his writing, and she wrote with breathtaking adoration of her daughter, Lily. Lily sang again today, one entry read. Not a song I have ever taught her. It was a melody that seemed to come from the trees themselves. Arthur says I am fanciful, but when she sings, the birds outside her window fall silent, as if they are listening. My little songbird, she is magic. But as the entries went on, the tone began to shift. The hope curdled into anxiety. The magic she saw in Lily started to frighten her. She talks to people who are not there, Eleanor wrote, her handwriting growing tighter, more frantic. She calls them the whispering children. She says they live in the walls. At night I hear her talking to them, her little voice a murmur in the dark. Arthur refuses to believe it. He says it is just a child's imagination. But I have heard them too, faintly, like the rustling of leaves, the whispering children. My blood ran cold. Eleanor had heard them. She wasn't just hearing echoes of the past like I was. She was hearing something else. The diary detailed Eleanor's growing terror. Lily was becoming more and more withdrawn, spending hours in her room whispering to her unseen friends. She claimed they taught her things. She drew pictures, strange, swirling symbols and figures that were half animal, half child. Arthur, consumed by his failed novel and his own frustrations, grew distant, angry. He saw Eleanor's fear as an attack on their daughter, a refusal to accept her uniqueness. Their arguments, the ones I had recorded, were not about a troubled marriage. They were about a terrified mother trying to protect her child from something her husband couldn't or wouldn't see. And then I came to the last entry. The date was October 12th, 1953. The night Lily disappeared. Eleanor's handwriting was a barely legible scrawl, the ink smudged in places as if by tears. They are calling for her. All night I have heard them, not whispers anymore. Their voices are clearer now. They are in the house. I can feel them. They promise her a place where she can sing forever, a place just for her. Arthur has locked her door. He says I am hysterical. He does not understand. They are not in the hallway. They are already in her room. They are in the walls. The entry ended there, abruptly. I closed the diary, my mind reeling. It wasn't a kidnapping. It wasn't a murder. It was something else. Lily hadn't vanished. She had been taken, lured away by whatever unseen things resided within the very structure of this house. Eleanor knew it. She had tried to warn Arthur, but he hadn't listened. And in the morning, her daughter was gone. The guilt must have been unimaginable. The grief, a living thing. No wonder the house was saturated with her sorrow. Suddenly, the air in the room dropped. A deep, bone-rattling chill swept over me. The light from the setting sun vanished, as if a switch had been thrown, plunging the room into a deep, oppressive twilight. And the sound started. It wasn't a single echo this time. It was a storm, a chaotic symphony of every sound I had recorded, all playing at once, swirling around me, Eleanor's weeping, Arthur's shouts, Lily's laughter, the scratching from inside the wall. It was a cacophony of pain and memory. But underneath it all, a new sound was emerging. A chorus of faint, sibilant whispers. The whispering children. Their voices were like the skittering of insects, the dry rustle of dead leaves. I couldn't understand the words, but I could feel the intent, the hunger. They were active, awake. Reading the diary, speaking Eleanor's words, it had somehow stirred them. The whispers grew louder, coalescing in the corner of the room where I had first recorded Lily's lullaby. The air shimmered, distorted, like heat rising from pavement. A shape began to form in the gloom. It was small, indistinct, but it was there. I scrambled backwards, my hands scrabbling against the floorboards, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. Then, from downstairs, I heard a deafening crash. The sound of my equipment, my entire studio being swept to the floor. The house was alive. It wasn't just replaying memories anymore. It was reacting. I ran. I bolted out of the room, down the stairs, my feet barely touching the steps. The living room was a wreck. My monitors were shattered, my mixing board overturned. But I didn't stop. I had to get out. The whispering was everywhere now, seeming to come from the very air around me, slithering into my ears. I fumbled with the lock on the front door, my fingers numb and clumsy. The old brass knob refused to turn. It was stuck. I threw my shoulder against the door, once, twice. It wouldn't budge. I was locked in, trapped. The whispering intensified, coiling around me, and through it, I heard a new sound, the clear, terrified cry of a little girl. "Mommy!" It was Lily's voice. Not an echo. It was present. It was real. And it was coming from the basement. Every instinct screamed at me to keep fighting the door, to break a window, to escape. But that cry, it cut through the fear. It was the sound of a child who needed help. I turned from the door and ran towards the basement. The door was slightly ajar. I kicked it open and plunged into the darkness below. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something sweet and cloying, like rotting flowers. My phone's flashlight cut a nervous beam through the blackness. The whispers were louder down here, echoing off the cold stone walls. And I could hear another sound now, the sound of digging, frantic, desperate digging. I followed the sounds to the far corner of the basement. The stone floor had been torn up. Dirt was piled high. And in the shallow pit, a figure was on its knees, clawing at the earth with bare, bloody hands. It was a woman. Her form was translucent, shimmering, a ghost of light and shadow. But I knew her. It was Eleanor. She was sobbing, a heart-wrenching sound of utter despair. She was digging, searching for something. I pointed my light past her into the hole she was creating. The beam landed on a small, rotted wooden plank, a section of the wall. It was different from the rest of the stone foundation. It was newer. A patch. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Lily hadn't been taken from the house. She had been taken by the house, pulled into the walls, and Eleanor, Her poor, grief-stricken mother had tried to dig her out. The ghostly form of Eleanor looked up, not at me, but through me. Her eyes were wide with a madness born of loss. Her mouth opened, and it was her voice, the one from the diary that filled the basement, raw and broken. "Give her back! Give me back my daughter!" The whispering erupted, a furious, deafening hiss that seemed to push the very air from my lungs. The ground beneath my feet trembled. The single light bulb hanging from the ceiling exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging us into absolute darkness, save for the frantic beam of my phone. And in that sudden, shocking blackness, I saw them. For just a second, in the periphery of my flashlight's beam, the walls themselves seemed to move, to writhe. And peeking out from the cracks in the stone, from the spaces between the floorboards, were countless pairs of small, dark eyes. The whispering children. They weren't ghosts. They were a part of the house. They were the house. The spirit of Eleanor let out one final agonizing scream that seemed to shake the very foundations, and then she dissolved, fading into nothing like smoke. The digging stopped. The whispers receded, pulling back into the walls, into the silence. I was alone again, in the dark. My phone's battery was dying, the light flickering. I scrambled back up the stairs, away from that disturbed earth, away from that patched-up wall. I didn't try the front door again. I grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, shattered the living room window, and hauled myself through, cutting my hands on the jagged glass. I didn't look back. I ran through the overgrown yard to my car and drove. I didn't stop until the sun came up and the fuel gauge hit empty, leaving me stranded on the side of a highway 60 miles away, a shivering, bloody mess. I never went back. I left my entire studio, thousands of dollars of equipment, in that house. I called the studio, told them there was a fire, that everything was destroyed. I quit. I couldn't work with sound anymore. For months, silence was the only thing that brought me any comfort. But you can never truly escape the noise. Sometimes late at night when my own house is quiet, I can still hear them. Faintly, the sound of a woman weeping, the whispers of children in the walls, and the song of a little girl, an echo in the dark, still waiting for her mother to dig her out. This story, this experience, it's branded onto me now. It's a part of my own room tone, and it makes me wonder, how many other places are like that one? How many houses are out there, not just haunted by their memories, but made of them? Listening, waiting, and what happens when you're the one who can finally hear them? I don't know what was real and what was a breakdown fueled by isolation and a morbid project. But I know what I heard, and I know I'll never be able to unhear it. It makes you think, doesn't it? If you have a story like this, something you can't explain, I'd honestly love to hear about it in the comments below. It helps to know you're not the only one listening to the silence. And if you want to hear more stories from the strange corners of the world, maybe hit that subscribe button. It gets lonely out here in the quiet.